Let's look at the reaction. Let's roll the clip from Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey in the wake of this scandal, and let's see what he has to say about it, and let's hear his clear condemnation of fraud in his community.
To our Somali community, we love you, and we stand with you. Our police, many of whom are Somali themselves, are trusted partners in keeping people safe. They will not collaborate with any federal agency around doing immigration enforcement work. Our city staff and our law enforcement will not ask the question as to whether an individual is documented or not. That's not American. That's not what we are about. And we're going to do right by every single person in our cities. And so to our Somali community, Daman Shabka, Somalied Kunul, Minnesota Garahan, Minneapolis, Waan Ku Janilahai, Waan Ku Gereb Taganahan. We love you.
Beautiful.
We stand with you, and we aren't backing down.
Yeah, I mean, Garaba Takanaha. That really sums it up. Garaba
Chris,
Takanaha. Yeah.
Stop speaking Italian on the podcast. Okay. Look.
I want to set it up for you because you had a great point. You said the liberal myth is that these groups come and become American.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's precise opposite. These groups come and the Americans become Somalian.
Yeah.
And so walk us through how we should think about this.
Okay, on the one hand, I'll just acknowledge that, yes, it's like not uncommon for politicians to speak in the native languages of certain constituencies. I find this particular example sort of funny for reasons that I don't think I have to explain. I think most people just find kind of like absurd on its face. I want to say there's like 5 things I want to say here. So firstly, let me say that there is a beautiful kind of synchronicity, and this is a testament to the persistence of certain cultural ethnic norms to obtain over time and in any place you might find them, that the Nordic populations of the upper Midwest are engaged in the exact same sort of altruistic migration experiment that I think is doomed to failure, that their, kinfolk are engaged in still in their Scandinavian countries. So I find this like sort of beautiful in a way. It is consistent with my assertion here that you can't just like strip people of the habits and norms of the groups that they come from. And so I will pause on this point for now. I want to come back to it and ask you why it's significant that we say that this is a Somali phenomenon. I know you've been pressed on this. Like people are asking, well, why can't you just call this fraud? Like, why do you have to insist on calling this Somali fraud? So I want to get your answer to that. That's one point. I just want to point out that synchronicity. The other thing here is with like Jacob Frey or the liberal establishment in a place like Minneapolis and the country at large is they're not going to do anything. I don't think that it's politically wise to expect them and operate under the assumption that things are going to get so bad and they're going to be so pressed by their voter base that they have to like do something about this. I think this issue of immigration and their insistence on a kind of fantastical notion of flattened equality across all groups, all people, that we can't make any judgments about who we bring in, and maybe this group is in fact responsible for a higher proportion of certain sort of behavior than this other group, and perhaps that should be taken into account when we make decisions at a population scale, which of course immigration is. They're not going to do any of this, I don't think. I think their fundamental sort of ideology denies them the possibility of taking these kinds of questions into account. And just as they did with like Black Lives Matter or the trans craze, they're just going to dig their heels in until they start losing the elections and are just pushed out of power. So a guy like Jacob Frey or Tim Walz simply just has to lose an election. The people of Minnesota are at some point going to just have to say, we're not going to do this anymore. We don't want this anymore. Will they get to that point? I certainly hope so. But, you know, you and I came from California. It isn't the case. It doesn't follow from things being very bad that you will necessarily see some kind of political turn that can reverse the fortunes of the place you're in. Things can go from bad to worse and just spiral and spiral and spiral indefinitely. So will this get fixed? I hope so. How it'll get fixed, the people of Minnesota are going to have to make a choice about what kind of life they want to live and what kind of state they want to live in.
But of course, we already have a recent example that provides evidence that things are likely to go from bad to worse. Again, these stories had been circulating in local media in bits and pieces around the state of Minnesota for many years. And Minneapolis voters recently reelected Jacob Frey to the office of mayor. And let's say they said, well, Frey is complicit. He's let this go too far. He didn't do anything to stop the fraud. He's, he doesn't seem to be serving the interests of Minnesota or Minneapolis voters as a whole. Let's elect the next guy. Well, the next guy, the man whom he narrowly beat in this election, was, of course, Omar Fateh, Somali, hyper leftist, who had a personal.
I have to pause right here. It needs to be said. Omar Fateh, and this was a story back during the election cycle, was cheating, was committing fraud during the election to rig the Democratic primary in his favor. And it was so brazen, in fact, again, this level of fraud that is so pervasive. It was so brazen that even Will Stancil, Mr. Will Stancil had to step in and say, this is even a little too much for me. And the Democratic Party had to rescind
they had to annul it.
Their vote for Omar Fateh and sort of declare like an open election because of the nature of this fraud. Okay, sorry to intervene, but
it actually it's even more complicated, and the story is even worse for Fateh. I think it's Omar Fateh. So Fateh cheats his way into kind of a backroom, smoke-filled room nominating process for this like weird, idiosyncratic Minnesota like Democratic sub-party, and then they pull it back in some kind of embarrassment. I mean, they had to do it because it was so clear that he had rigged this thing. But then they kind of like they take the gloves off and they say, well, we're not going to hit him about this because that makes us feel too uncomfortable as white liberals in good standing.
Right.
But then, what's even worse is that Fateh himself had long-standing relationships with a number of the people who were arrested and then convicted of these fraud schemes.
Shocking.
And so the fraudsters were not, the downtrodden, the exiled, the marginalized, bad apples at the outer ring of Somali society, and that they were shunned as they were discovered for fraud. No. These people were tightly knit with Ilhan Omar, with Omar Fateh, with Attorney General Keith Ellison. And so you have the irony that actually Jacob Fateh or Jacob Frey, I mean, Jacob it's like they're like merged. I mean, they're like hybrids now. But Jacob Frey is the least bad option. And we know certainly that he's not going to do anything to solve the problem. And so what you're going to have is this static situation where the reality is unfolding, but political leaders engage in these elaborate rituals of reality suppression. Say, we need to do whatever we can to suppress the basic reality of what's happening. And the pain of what's happening is not as bad as the potential pain of acknowledging what's happening. And the real tragedy here, though, is that situation can actually sustain for a very long time.